can hear you, Daniel.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi, and good evening. Welcome to part 4 of our webinar series supported by Imagining Otherwise. My name is Dr. Ali Walsh, and I am co-chair this evening. I'm based at the University of Leeds in the School of Performance and Cultural Industries, and I'm principal investigator of a team working together from Bottom Up and Chisimani Centre for Activist Education in Cape Town. That project is called Imagining Otherwise, and it's a participatory youth-led arts project specifically focused on co-creation with young people who are thinking about their contribution to civil society and what needs to change. Throughout the project, we're interested in how young people in South Africa perceive and respond to the post-apartheid social and political landscape. And we're using arts education to generate active partnerships that can address and transform issues of hopelessness, injustice, and lack of visibility among the country's youth. So with this event series, this series of online talks, we are asking the speakers to consider their experiences and practices through critical perspectives. And in doing so, perhaps we may discover new ways of imagining, organizing, and resisting. So it's to me to offer our thanks to the funders. We are supported by the Global Challenges Research Fund for Changing the Story, and this dialogue series is funded by the University of Leeds and the Extending Impact Funds in Arts, Humanities and Cultures faculty. So I'm joined as co-host by Ashley Fazakius, co-director of Bottom Up, promoting critical thinking and social justice in schools, and he's going to introduce our panel.
Thank you, Elwyn. So tonight we have Ishtar Lakhani, and she is working as a feminist activist and troublemaker in the field of social justice advocacy for over 15 years. Her career ranged from coordinating a radical feminist advocacy network for survivors of sexual violence to revolutionary sandwich making in a founding of Love and Revolution. And as the Advocacy and Human Rights Defense Manager at the Sex Worker Education and Advocacy Task Force, that's SWET, she advocated for human rights of sex workers and campaigned for the full decriminalization of sex work. Currently, Ishtar is a free radical that collaborates with a range of social justice organizations, movements, and networks in providing support to strengthen their approaches to human rights advocacy. Her passion lies in creative activism, facilitation, the experimental melding of fantasy and reality of art and activism in an attempt to imagine and enact what a more equal and just world might look like. And then we have Sarah, and this is her own bio that she wrote. Sarah is a playful activist and a serious artist participating in the building of new realities that suit us all better. A filmmaker, content creator, idea generator, and all-round doer of things, Sarah is a crazy and emotional healer using every resource she can imagine to contribute to building a world that she can exist in with ease. She occasionally goes by Frank. Daniel Maphosa, and Daniel is just having some technical difficulties. Hopefully he'll join us again. Is the founder and director of Savannah Trust, a theatre organization that uses theatre for social change in Harare, Zimbabwe. Is also the festival director of the Protest Arts International Festival in Harare. Daniel has worked, Daniel has worked in the arts industry for the past 25 years as an actor, arts manager, trainer, play director, and producer. Over the past 5 years, he has been working and collaborating with some South Africa's leading theatre and dance artists with the aim of enhancing SADC cross-border collaborations that would result in opening of artistic markets in the region. Of late, his focus is in the arts management and research in the arts. And then, we have Alex Sutherland, and Alex is currently working at the Chishimani Center for Arts and Activism. Alex is also currently collaborating on the project called Changing the Story that Bottom Up is also part of. We're currently working with high school students, youth, busy using arts and activism as pedagogy and exploring issues around race and space. But Alex also has a long history within the field of arts and in the performing arts as well. So these are our guests for tonight. I'm going to be hiding away somewhere trying to get Daniel to help us and playing some technical role tonight, but I'm also going to kind of be facilitating conversation a little bit later on. What I've asked our guests to do is to each present to us an example of how in their own work they have used arts and activism. But also the title for the talk tonight was Educated Hope and Arts as Public Pedagogy. And we've borrowed these terms from the work of Henry Giroux in his book, The Violence of Organized Forgetting. Educated hope really it's a different kind of hope, right? So when we talk about hope, we have different versions of hope. So I think it was Cornel West that says you can have a kind of hope that is about simple optimism, where we deny reality, or we look at the evidence and we just seek to see a good story in the evidence, even if the story is telling us something different. And you get mythical hope, which is the kind of hope that which maybe we spoke about previously in our Imagining Otherwise series, the kind of hope that students are offered at school. If you just do this, then everything's going to be all right. Devoid of any discussion about power and what's happening within society or the politics of power, right? And then you get educated hope, which is a kind of critical hope that wants to engage with what is happening within society, but also kind of this belief that change is possible because we make history. So if what we have today has been made, then we can unmake it. But it depends also on being able to imagine otherwise, being able to think new thoughts or different things. And this is why we are also talking about the arts. How does the arts actually help us to think new thoughts, to imagine otherwise? So art as public pedagogy. And tonight we've got people who are far more experienced than I am in the use of arts and activism. So I'm looking to learn a lot tonight. And we've just got Daniel back as well. Daniel, can you hear us?
Now I can hear you, yes.
Oh, perfect. Great. So Daniel, you're just on time because we would like you to start off our conversation. So could you tell us a little bit about your work in Zimbabwe?
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Daniel Maphosa. I am a founder and director of Savannah Trust, which is a not-for-profit organization that uses the arts for social change and development. Our mission basically is to engage citizens through theater and other art forms to advocate for their rights and transform communities. We are based in Harare, Zimbabwe, and founded in 2006. And the organization works in marginalized rural and urban township areas. Our activities include capacity development of community-based theater groups in arts management and participatory theater so that they're able to effectively engage citizens on issues they interface with on a day-to-day basis. The second activity is community engagement, where we utilize interactive theater to engage marginalized communities on issues of human rights, governance, gender-based violence, and peace building. We also run the Protest Arts Festival, which brings together works of art that advocate for a free, just, and peaceful society. And finally, we also produce radio dramas that tackle various issues of concern to human rights, governance, democracy, and gender-based violence, among others. So the methodology of our work. We use theater as determined by the end goal that we would have defined. So first and foremost, we define what we want to achieve in a specific intervention. We always find it important to define the goal to our intervention, which at the end of the day will be used to evaluate the success of or lack of it. So over the years, we have classified our interventions in the following three categories. The first one is awareness raising. So generally, this is when we work with and in local communities to increase citizen knowledge on a specific issue or issues. The first stage in this process is to do a survey or a small research with our M&E and artistic team on the knowledge gaps, if any, among the target groups on a certain issue, say, for example, women's rights. We then define the goal of our intervention, for example, to increase knowledge among citizens on women's rights. And then we design a theatre intervention that enables people to identify their rights within the play performance. There's also need to ensure that the people also identify the various violations of rights within the performance. An in and post-performance discussion is facilitated to find out if the people have understood the subject matter. We therefore measure the success of our intervention through the target community members being able to articulate and understand, for example, rights in the post-performance discussion. So this is the first level of our theatre intervention. And then the second method that we use is the advocates or political theatre. So in this particular intervention, it involves Savannah Trust identifying an issue of concern within the socio-economic or political governance structures. We then create what we call hard-hitting plays. And these plays seek to criticize the status quo. So most of our full-length productions are modeled in this way. They are mostly critical of the status quo. And let me hasten to say they push a certain agenda or they advocate for something. They are by nature not neutral. So in this kind of plays, the idea is not to discuss, but to register our concern on a certain issue. So we find ourselves, and in most of our plays in political theater, there is no middle line or middle ground. So we always say the establishment must know that what they are doing is wrong. So this is the kind of theater that has always gotten us into problems with the state. We have been accused of being regime change agents, or because of mostly the political plays that we produce. Then finally, we have what we call dialogical theater, or some would call it theater for transformation. So in the past 10 years, Savannah Trust has realized that if there is to be transformation in our societies, there is need to engage the opposing forces or different and key stakeholders to a prevailing problem that would have been identified. So societal transformation can only take place if there is a give and take. That is a negotiated process between and among the key parties to a problem. There should be a common understanding that is reached between the parties. For this to happen, there should be a dialoguing process that starts with people accepting that there is a problem, leading to a desire to change among the parties. So to achieve this, Savannah Trust utilizes the theater for transformation model that puts dialogue at the center. Working in Zimbabwean communities over the years on issues of human rights, governance, democracy, and peace building has told Savannah Trust, or has made Savannah Trust realize that there is limited dialogue between the citizens and state parties. The organization has been using theater to bring the citizens and the state or any other parties to a problem together so that there could be a dialoguing process. So normally this happens at a very community level. For example, when we work with local councils or local political parties or other traditional leaders. So our role is to create a conducive platform for dialogue that is not confrontational or antagonist to any party. Our theatrical activities that sometimes are full of humor and fun makes both parties to relax and truthfully engage with each other. The theatre performance activities culminate into a discussion led by an impartial facilitator. So we have realized that this kind of theatre disarms the antagonizing parties. They begin to feel that both parties have a role to deal with the problematic issue. We therefore believe that this kind of theatrical intervention builds trust, relations, common understanding, and facilitate transformation in the target communities. So we have seen ourselves giving hope to local communities and also ensuring that the state becomes responsible and they are answerable to the communities. So at a local level where we work, we really don't work at a very, very national level. We go to the communities and map out the authorities or duty bearers within that communities and facilitate them meeting the citizens so that they can discuss issues of concern to the communities. So in summary, this is how we work in Zimbabwe, as we try to use theatre both for awareness raising, maybe that is what we call for pedagogy, and also for political purposes. Yeah. So in short, this is how we use our theatre. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. As I listen to that, I'm hearing a lot of kind of Paulo Freire's work on pedagogy of the oppressed, but also Augusto Boal, particularly with the political theatre, creating a platform for dialogue. And I like what you say about disarming antagonizing parties by creating that kind of space for people to engage robustly, but through the use of the arts. Also reminded about Freire's idea of the codes and how codes create the kind of entry point for critical conversation. So I'm really keen to hear more later on. But let's move on to our next presenter. And shall we have Sarah next?
Hi. Hi, everyone. So I do a number of different projects, mostly within digital art space at the moment, and then linked to movement building. And I think I play with the ways in which digital platforms kind of present themselves and what we can do with them. So a couple of cool projects. That I'm very involved with at the moment and that excites me is called Until We Remember. And Until We Remember is a map that's about to go live that we plot stories on. And the stories are from anyone that sends us a story, actually. And there are no kind of restrictions or prescriptions on what the story should be. And so Until We Remember came about with from a page that I run called Color Mentality, where we discuss racial heritage and race, heritage, culture. And we kind of started figuring out, where does this move? How do we start thinking beyond what we've been called to who we are? And then who we are not necessarily just being something that we enact or something that we imagine, but that imagination work is actually also remembering work. And so until we remember who we are and not just what we have been called, we make believe. And so we just collecting all kind of media. So stories, videos, voice notes, old pictures, made up stories, and we just plot it on the map and link the story not necessarily with a timeline, but with space, with location. And I think to just kind of start generating a new, or not a new, just an invisibilized understanding of our land. And I think, and that's kind of stage one of a project that also becomes a kind of work that we do in communities. So we will launch a traveling time machine where we start kind of doing imaginary, also theater work, where we build crews and we start going on missions throughout time and space, and using that metaphor to kind of undo trauma in that is lodged, psychologically, emotionally, through imagination work and play. I think because the moment that we exist in is so painful that I think light approaches can enter, our consciousnesses, our hearts, our minds, and do really deep work, which I think is required. So that's something that is also, it feels like healing work. It feels like creative work. It feels like art. It feels like activism, because I think it equips people to enact themselves with greater ease. And I think that activism is to build a world where we exist as we have always been, but are not allowed to be. And then another cool thing that we were playing with is called the New Normal game. The New Normal game kind of went live like in the midst of like COVID, when things were just like, whoa. And it seemed very difficult to see beyond that current second, and also difficult to have conversations that weren't just panicked or really, really, really terrified. And so we wanted to integrate onto Facebook, which can often be a really toxic platform, new ways of interacting with Facebook. And so we decided to make a game. So we kind of approached some people we admire, some thought leaders, some activists, some artists. We also made an open call for people to apply. And then we collected players, and then those players would respond to like an evil game master that we would write. And the game master would be based on the current moment, struggles that we have, but also almost imagined into the future and almost into the past. I don't know if that sounds a bit loopy, but I suppose I like the concept of the eternal present. And so if we see what we fear of tomorrow to exist within today, that metaphor can be placed anywhere. And so, we would make a game master that kind of challenged our players, and the players would offer possible worlds, build solutions of realities that mitigated or denied or defended or prevented what the game master offered, which were very real things. So like the result or consequence of, taking massive loans or patriarchy, and then the audiences would vote on the world that they prefer, and then that would become the kind of foundation for the next round, where we would create a new game master. And so each round builds upon the next, creating a completely alternative reality where we've kind of gotten to collectively. And then also just like, I suppose, less far out, but Sound the Call is a project I also do, the voice note series on WhatsApp. There are topics, a lot of it is about care and intimacy, but also at the moment there's a Sound the Call Battle Cry, focuses on gender-based resistance. And so it's stories of gender-based violence and resistance across the continent. People send voice notes to topics that we present, and then we edit the voice notes together and broadcast them out on broadcast lists. But thematically right now, a lot of the work is about care, and that art is care, because life is art and activism when you get to express yourself as yourself. Yeah, I think I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I really like what you say about remembering or memory work in the work that you're doing concerning identity and so on. Think of the present moment with COVID and some of the challenge we face, how remembering the past also helps us to think about the present moment, but at the same time also to think about new imaginings or different directions in which we could take. So it's really interesting. Also, I follow the New Normal game and really intrigued by some of the stories which have been posted. So yeah, I look forward to engaging more with that later. For now, we Ishtar.
Hi, just before I start, the new normal game is amazing and it gives me life. So anyone who hasn't followed, I highly recommend. So what am I going to talk about? So when approached, I was struggling to think about how I'm going to bring these different worlds together, and I thought I'd first take myself on my own journey, and my journey begins with having parents that are self-identified artists. So my mother, a fine art historian, my father was involved in acting, and they ran a theater which put on protest theater during the anti-apartheid movement. And then I had inspiration that I was going to be this artist, and because I saw around me the power of art and the power of art in shaping conversations, in shaping how we imagine the future, in instigating conversations, in kind of shaping the world that we live in. And I thought, this is an awesome thing. And so I registered to do a fine art degree. And then I went to an exhibition and got wildly intimidated and immediately chickened out. And then pursued an anthropology degree, which was about human beings and culture. And to be fair, anthropology as a discipline hasn't always covered itself in glory, but we're trying to be better now. And I got involved in activism, and feminist activism, and mobilizing and organizing, especially particularly around issues of gender-based violence. And then I just went down this activist road, and I found myself like in my mid-20s, kind of fueled by coffee, cigarettes, and righteousness. Getting things done, like doing policy submissions and mobilizing and petitions and all sorts of lobbying, and like really advocating for legal reform, and looking around and going, is this working? It's not fulfilling me in any way. I'm not seeing the patriarchy fall. I'm really exhausted and burnt out. All the amazing, incredible feminist activists around me are burnt out and exhausted, and the patriarchy isn't going anywhere. So I had a little bit of an existential crisis, going, what do I do? Where next? And I took a moment to think of, what am I trying to do in the world? And what I'm trying to do is get other people to care about human rights. And in order for me to do that, I needed to reflect on what made me care about human rights. And what made me care was being surrounded by incredibly political conscious feminists, activists, creatives. I had a lot of fun growing up, making art, telling political stories. It was actually really fun to be politically conscientized. And that's kind of what motivated me to do what I do. And so then I asked myself the question, okay, if these are the things that moved me, what moves other people to care? Because as activists, that's essentially what we're trying to do. We're trying to like sell people on equality and justice and I don't know, women's autonomy. So if policies and submissions and I don't know, petitions didn't move me to care, what made me think that would move other people to care? So I started asking this question a lot in spaces to kind of human rights activists around the world, to say, what made you care? What made you give a shit? What made you dedicate your life to social justice? And often the stories that were told to me were deeply personal, moving stories. And so then I thought, okay, how do we move people? Because that's what we're doing. And that's where I think artistry and creativity comes into place. Because if you think about it, as activists, and me as a self-identified activist, we play a lot in the political landscape. But artists play in the cultural landscape, and artists have that ability to move people, to really make visceral experiences, and then started playing around with what amazingness could happen from the combination of artists and activists. And I'm not saying that these are mutually exclusive things. I'm not making kind of false binaries that there are artists and that there are activists. There's a lot of gray area in between. But what I found magical over the last decade, and where I find the most magic happens and the most shifts happen in kind of in the human rights spaces I find myself in, is when there's this wonderful sweet spot between activists and artists. The Center for Artistic Activism, incredible organization, have these terms that I think are very relevant and useful to me. So they say, activists are very effective human beings, and I identify as that. I mean, if you want a 200-person, 300-person protest outside Parliament, can do that like that, can organize, can mobilize, but sometimes are so kind of stuck in the practicality and stuck in the now and stuck in the trenches of activism that often lose the ability to dream and imagine. And artists are very affective kind of in their skill set, so know how to move people and touch people and really resonate in an emotive way, and love artists, love, but sometimes can't organize their way out of a paper bag, so often not the most organized. And these are I know these are stereotypes and broad assumptions, I know this, but I've often found that when you bring artists together with activists, there's some sort of magic that happens in being able to create interventions that are both affective and effective, because of the skill sets they bring to the table. And we've been playing a lot with this kind of combination of creativity and artistic methodology and human rights, specifically in the sex worker movement in South Africa. And what we found was that, I know what's the first rule of guerrilla warfare is know your terrain and use it to your advantage. And so the terrain that activists play in is often the political terrain, and the terrain that artists play in is often the kind of the cultural terrain. And when you combine that, you can now create and change narratives and shape new worlds and ways of being and ways of doing. And so some of the more concrete examples that we've been playing around with is, what does it look like when sex workers can shape the narrative, that can shape the culture, that can write stories and create theater and move people through storytelling. And that storytelling is done in a number of different creative ways. So everything from Sweat starting the first ever sex worker-led theater to put on performances around not only about sex worker rights, but as sex worker rights and activists as full human beings, as mothers, as teachers, as students, as working people. We've done a whole range of kind of photography, of writing. And for me, all this has been really important, because what it does, it changes the cultural terrain. And I think that's what artists do best, is change the language that we use, change the images that we use, change the references that we use. And so that has all been, at the end of the day, quite fun, because I think what Sarah was also talking about is really important, that we do this to change the laws and to kind of topple oppressive regimes and to smash the patriarchy. But we also involve art and creativity in our practice because it's fun and it's energizing and it's a way to connect with people. I think what Daniel said also really resonated with me, in that using creativity in your approach to talk about something that can be so traumatizing and so heavy, like human rights violations, disarms people in a way that they're more open to engaging as kind of fellow human beings. So yeah, I'm really excited to. I'm learning already so much from the different speakers and how to use this. Oh no, I don't want to use kind of. I was going to say like a tool in our arsenal, but I don't like the weapons imagery. I'll come up with something else. But another tool that we can use to kind of dismantle these various systems that we find ourselves in that don't work for us. And I think I'm going to leave it there for now. Yes, that is what I have.
Thank you, Ishtar. There's so much in what you've said. I just think about some of the work which we do with high school students, where we kind of use this thing of looking at what are the everyday realities or the symptoms of a problem, the structures and the policies which support that. But then to get to the roots, to actually get to the cultural and the ideological stuff that undergird these things is much harder work to do. And I think that is the terrain where kind of the arts helps us to get to that. So it's not just about like kind of our stories of our racialized or classed school system is also got to do with stories of superiority and inferiority or social imaginaries of difference. And that cultural work needs to be done to actually help us to begin to relate or to imagine ourselves in different relations or different kinds of relationship to each other. So I'm really intrigued by what you have to say. So we'll go to our next speaker, Alex, and then we'll have some conversation after that. So Alex, there you go.
Hi, thanks so much. I think we've had three very different examples of the role of the arts within political imagination. So what I just want to talk a little bit about is how the Chisimani Center for Activist Education has employed and why we have used the arts within our political education. And I think, Ishtar talks about, when artists and activists come together. I think a lot of our work is also about enabling spaces for activists to see themselves as creative and therefore to imagine change and imagine something that is a different world. And we've all used this word imagination in one or more ways in this presentation. And I think that is what's critical in terms of this idea of educated hope and public pedagogy. So I've been quite conformist, and I've got a bit of a slideshow because I wanted to show different examples of our work. So Ashley, are you going to help me with that, please? Okay, yes, something's happening. Okay, so our core mission is to really work with activists to support social justice and social justice and programs. And the way we do this is to infuse, in terms of the arts, is to infuse the arts in our political education, but to also work with activists to use arts in their activism. Next slide, Ashley. So, one of the ways we do this is really to acknowledge the role of cultural expression as a role in all sorts of modes of resistance and to imagine a different future. And so within all of our work, the idea of resistance and imagination is really key organizing principle. That if you want to change the world, you first have to know what the world is and name it and resist it, but that you also have to imagine something very different. So we work a lot with visual arts, with game, with play, with performance in our work. And this example here in the slide was a small group task of activists who were asked to bring together some of the work that we had been doing theoretically, and they created the Snakes and Ladders game to answer the question, what are the contemporary challenges of freedom today? And in that particular school, we were looking at challenges such as inequality, rising authoritarianism, as well as the dangers of surveillance and big data. And so they brought that all together in a snakes and ladders game in terms of how things progress and then they regress. Next slide, thank you. So I love this quote by Bell Hooks: "The function of art is to do more than tell it like it is, it's to imagine what is possible." And so these pictures are from an activist school we held in 2017. And the culminating activity was to ask activists to actually build the world they wanted to see. And so the map you see on the floor there is imagining Southern Africa in the year, what was it, 2218. And they were divided into different sector groups to literally build with Lego and Play-Doh and cardboard different aspects of the society that we hopefully will dream into being one day. And so this is just an example of the political imagination. Next. So so we use arts as a conscientizing strategy. But I also love this quote from Steve Duncombe, who's part of the Center for Creative Activism that Ishtar spoke awake. And it's also a way of building groups and communities and collective action through what other people have been saying in terms of joy and playfulness. The role of culture here is very important. And Duncombe says the reactivity of producing culture has political meaning. And I think when activists, and I'm going to talk about young people that we work with in particular, understand themselves as creators and not to be given a script, but to change the script. That is a political meaning and an activity that creates meaning. I think we can go on to the next slide. Hopefully. Okay. We talked a bit about Giroux, and I'm not going to read this whole quote, but I really I'm going to read the one in yellow where he says, educators need to approach learning not merely as an acquisition of knowledge, but as the production of cultural practices that offer students a sense of identity, place, and hope. And so I think Sarah and others have talked about this need of hope. And I think that is what, when art meets critical education, which when meets political education can do, and in many ways is what we are trying to do in the sense of identity, place, and hope, through the use of, enabling people to allow themselves to be creators and authors of the world. Okay, and next. Okay, so I just want to move on to the youth work. So this is an area where young people are introduced to political education and to become political agents through the arts. And there are two main projects involved in this. The one was something we did in 2017, which was the centenary of the Russian Revolution. And we held a mad 2.5-day boot camp with about 30 young people from different schools across Cape Town. And they learned stop motion animation over those days, and then created short films in relation to storying the Russian Revolution from their own perspective. I mean, in this project, there was also a hidden curriculum in that we were also bringing young people from across the spatial and apartheid divides in Cape Town. So there were young people from the flats, there were young people from Khayelitsha, from Langa, and one of the biggest outcomes in the evaluation was I got to work and create with other people that I never would have ordinarily. And of course, what's the beauty about co-creation in the arts is that your focus is on the making of the movie. It's not on, the other shynesses that might come with being a teenager. And through that, the kind of hidden curriculum is realized where people start to interact that ordinarily wouldn't due to the racial divides. So the Chisimani Arts Festival is a youth arts festival, which is a themed arts festival. Its first one was in 2018 and continuing. And if we go on to the next slide, I'll just talk a little bit about the themes. So again, what this tries to do is bring young people from across Cape Town who ordinarily wouldn't work together, to the center to create performance and visual art. And in 2018, again, we like anniversaries. It was the anniversary of the 1968 political moment where young people across the world started to agitate for change. And so we asked the young people to respond to that. We had a workshop around the 1968, what was happening around the world, and asked them what their 68 would be now. Last year, of course, was the 25-year anniversary of South Africa's democracy. And so again, we looked at those 25 years with them and then asked them to create performance pieces in response to that anniversary and the festival there was called Freedom Now. If we go on to some of the next slides, I'm hoping to show you some of the, if we go on to the next one, I don't think I have time to speak about that. Okay, so in the first iteration of this festival, it really was a site performance work. So we were on the streets of Mowbray as well as in our building. And for this photo you're seeing here, these young people were from Zonnebloem High and doing a wonderful piece about identities and rights of young people. And the police showed up because, of course, you don't want young people being political in the streets, and wanted to shut it down because they were performing in the streets. Not a main street at all, but somebody had reported them. And what happened was one of my directors just spent a long time speaking to the police in the background to allow them just to finish the piece, and then we could move on. So this aspect of state surveillance entered into this public pedagogy space at that moment. And what this means is that for the following year, we thought, well, we're going to be good. We're going to ask permission. And actually permission was really, really difficult to find. And so a lot of the photos from the next year's festival are in our building. If we could just go through some of those, please. So that's at the, yeah, so this is young people from Tafelsig performing about environment and gender. And the next one. This was a group from the Adonis Musati Project for Refugees and Asylum Seekers. A really, really powerful story about what it's like to be a young person, some of whom are born in South Africa to immigrant parents, and the levels, the desperation for belonging. And this piece was a 12-minute version, and it then got selected for the final Zabalaza Festival and extended into a 40-minute version of it. It was the first time these young people had ever performed before. They wrote the script, they rehearsed it, and then went onto the Baxter stage. So it was a really, really wonderful iteration of that. And then the next slide. One of the wonderful parts of this last year's festival was Tandile Mbacha ran a youth group from the Tandukulu High School, which is just down the road from our center. It's an anti-bullying project which uses the arts to think about bullying and peer support. And so the finale of our festival was a Vogue ball, where all these young people dressed the identities that they were proud of and performed in front of the whole audience of about 200 people. And there's Tandile in a dress and his heels at the end, and being a wonderful MC and promoting queerness as an acceptable, wonderful, joyful aspect of identity that everyone could embrace. Next one, Ashley. Yeah, so this was the last year festival, involved 75 people. And these are just shots from some of the workshops we gave. And then the next one. Yeah, so part of what we are involved with the Imagining Otherwise project is looking at what does art making mean in a racially apartheid divided city, and how can making arts change perceptions and create aspects of imagined social change. And so this is what we're working on at the moment. It's had to radically change with lockdown. So a lot of it's over WhatsApp, Zoom workshops. And the 25 young people involved in this project are primarily from the Cape Flats, but also young people from the Adonis Musati Project, involved in film, writing, as well as visual arts through dedicated mentoring from artist facilitators. And if I just go through the final slide. This is just an example of the WhatsApp prompts through the film section, which draw on how the young people are understanding space and the neighborhoods they live in, and then incorporating using film and creating films on their smartphones. And I think for me, the key part and point of using the arts with young people to engage them politically is this notion of transformation. So how do we transform our own stories and see it against the backdrop of wider politics? This whole idea of resistance and imagination is also crucial to that with young people, some of whom feel quite hopeless within the environment that they find themselves in. Art making allows one to become an author of the world and to imagine the change that we want to see. And so that is part of how we have used it at Chisamani. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, I'm really grabbed by the idea of the police van that was in the background over there, and how art, or what Chisimani is doing in that moment, is considered dangerous or posing a threat in some way. To work with ideas or to play with ideas is considered dangerous. But I also like the idea of the participatory arts, or that term participatory arts, which you introduced to us. And I remember from Augusta Ball's work, the kind of this idea of flipping from the spectator who just consumes, is not part of, to this idea of someone who's a participatory or an actor within that process. And so involving ourselves in that process like this is something I really like. So I'm going to bring us all back onto the screen, and hopefully Daniel can join us. There we go. So I had a few questions, and you answered all of my questions. So I'm going to have to come up with newer and better ones. But one of the questions that I did want to pose was this idea of the art and the political. So does art need to be overtly political in order to be able to communicate its message? And this I'm asking in the context of all of you are doing art activism. So yeah, the question, does it need to be overtly political, or is art inherently political in any case? I'm not going to pose.
I could see everyone looking around, so I'm going to jump in, Ashley, because, well, and I'm going to pick up some of the ideas that have come from the speakers across their introductions to their work, because I'm not sure if there's one answer to your question there. It strikes me that they've all been talking about the value and the beauty and the absolute possibility of something being out of place. Yeah, so those young people in front of the police van and on the streets being seen as somehow out of place, and therefore the police turn up to question what's going on, or using really graphic visual stark imagery to signal a point about gender-based violence, for example, and how that then can grab someone's attention in a completely different way, is in itself doing political work, because it's questioning, or it's asking spectators or audiences or the general public to question what is supposed to be there. Who is supposed to be there? Who has the right to take up space, and who has the right to make meaning in one place or another? And to me, the question that was running through all our beautiful speakers' presentations is this idea of prefiguration, this kind of theoretical notion that comes from anarchism, which is about, if we imagine a state that is not the state that we take for granted. That's not the given that seems to be handed down to us. But we imagine it and we start to enact it in the present in some small way. Maybe we can bring ourselves to make it possible in the future. I got really emphatic right there in the last moment, but it strikes me that it's a kind of starting point for us to maybe come in and have that conversation across our speakers about the place and the role of the political in art making.
Can I?
Sarah.
So, hi. I think the place in which my activism is born from, within my body. So, sorry, I speak a bit very sometimes, but this is natural. So emotionally, it is not one of solely of anger or disgust with the current state of the world. It is a complete surety and clarity that the way that I am to exist and the way that we are to exist is not this. And so it is one that I will only be in place in a world that treats people as we should be treated. And that is a life pursuit. And so for me, rebellion exists as like almost a subcategory because it's required in this moment. And I think what else is required in this moment is courage, because the hope that is required needs to be met. And so the culture building, the dependency on art in this moment isn't only just about relieving some of the despair or finding self-expression. It's about filling up the spaces within ourselves that we're told not to exist, so that we can have the courage to exist as we are. And to exist as we are is to deny this current system, is to recognize that it is, in fact, in the process of dying, and that we should not cling to it because it will only take us down with it. I'm finished.
Gorgeous. Ishtar, do you want to come in?
No, I was just reflecting on Alex's picture as well about the students and the police van, and what sprung to mind was something that we did, and the use of creativity and arts to actually evade the police, because generally Sweat is known for our kind of orange t-shirts that say this is what a sex worker looks like, and just your very presence at a courthouse or or parliament, kind of government institutions. These institutional spaces are created on purpose to be very uncomfortable and exclusionary. Just the mere presence of us is enough to kind of provoke some sort of police and hostility. And what we found was by using a very creative approach, we actually managed to kind of sneakily evade the police in the sense of we wanted to do an activity on the Sea Point Promenade in Cape Town. And that is a very clear space of where the state or where community even sees as a space that sex workers should not be. And this was a space we wanted to occupy, but we wanted to occupy it for as long as humanly possible. So what we did was, we know as NGOs, we have a tendency to love a stand. We love one of these branded gazebos with a pull-up banner and a nice trestle table where we put our pamphlets and we earnestly engage people going, do you want to hear about the rights of sex workers? And so we thought, how could we do this in a way that's more engaging, in a way that's more fun, but also in a way that the police won't shut us down in 2 seconds. So we made a very vibrant, very orange, kind of bright lemonade stand that said "Ask a Sex Worker," and we had music and orange sunglasses, and we offered free hand massages, and the police walked straight past us. They assumed that we're way too fun to be activists kind of demanding our rights, because surely activists that are on a mission for human rights can't be having fun. They must look cross and shouty all the time. And we managed to engage so many people in just having a really different approach to how we want to engage with people. Another firm lesson that we've learned is that we learned from, especially from the theatre makers, is captive audience. And how do you have a captive audience? How do you make them listen to you? You offer something free, like a hand massage. And once they're sitting down and you're massaging their hands, then you tell them why they should care about the decriminalization of sex work, because then it's really awkward for them to be like, oh no, don't, sorry. So you get them in there, with the hand massage, and then you tell them your story, and you don't stop the massage until you fully convince them that we need to decriminalize sex work. So it just made me think of that story, and as well as the prompt that you were talking about kind of imagining and enacting what the world we want to live in would look like. Another example where it started off as like just a thought experiment of what would the world look like, what would South Africa look like if we had a sex worker as a president. And then our national elections came around, and we're like, why can't we? And then we looked at all the bureaucracy that it took to register a political party, and we thought no, but why not run a fake campaign? And so a very cheap and very effective campaign. All we did was make some really nice fake political posters for the SWAG party, the Sex Workers Action Group. The acronym is on purpose. And kind of have a campaign video and really use that as a platform. So instead of kind of making posters about kind of decriminalization of sex work, we had political posters that we put next to the EFF posters, that we put next to the ANC posters. And that really worked in getting across what we were trying to say. And people actually believed that it was a real political party, and were really, yes, we fooled you, Alex. That's amazing.
I wanted to vote for you.
That's amazing. And so, but what was really awesome about it was incredible. It started a conversation in a very different way, because we were speaking about sex workers' rights in terms of workers' rights and all these elements. And what was amazing about it is that it also, the reaction to the campaign made it abundantly clear that people are open to change and want change. We really expected hellish pushback. We expected kind of hate mail and all sorts of like violent abuse. But actually what we got was way more support. And so we were surprised. I mean, it was something that we hadn't planned. We hadn't planned for so many people to be like, why aren't you on the ballot? We were hoping to vote for you. And for me, that was so refreshing to be like, actually, it's not all negative. It's people are wanting alternatives. They just don't know how to kind of engage it. And I think part of our job as activists, artists, activists, and the intersections in between is to kind of imagine that, but also create it in different ways.
So I'm going to jump in there and see if we can make a link with what Daniel was talking about earlier, in that sense of having these amazing expanded views of what is fun and engaging and vibrant and exciting as a hook for people to get in, but at the same time really also dealing with life and death. What is our future going to be like? What is the state doing to us? How are we being repressed in a very lived, embodied present? So it's not none of this is theoretical, and that goes for across all the examples that everyone's mentioned tonight. So Daniel, do you have any thoughts there on this kind of set of tactics that you've mentioned from Savannah Trust, or that you'd like to comment on in terms of the other panelists?
Sorry, can you come back with the question again?
I'm glad you asked, because I can rephrase it better.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you have any kind of thoughts about this. We're almost talking about it as a binary. So I'm interested in your opinion on this binary of fun versus what is underneath as this very serious, kind of earnest, maybe heavy reason that we might be engaging in political activism?
Yeah, I'll join that with what I wanted to say to the question that has been asked. This is my opinion. I think art is inherently political. But the mere fact that we are dealing with power relations, with that is politics, with decision making, with the distribution of resources, with distribution of power, with governance issues. So even if you look at the way, for example, in theater, in every story that you write, it also deals with power relations. The basics of script writing is antagonist and protagonist. So you're dealing with power relations there. So even if that kind of art becomes humorous, you have fun, you are enjoying. But in that process, you are also, as creators, reimagining. You are imagining the future. You are imagining how the world should be like. You are imagining how the setup, your certain setup or social structure should be like. So looking at that, I've reached a conclusion that really, particularly in our environment, where corruption, where oppression, where violations continue to exist, art continues to be political and cannot distance itself from politics. For me, when we are creating fun, when we are making people laugh, we are basically making people relax so that they can look at themselves from a point of view where they then can begin to engage. We are dealing with an underlying political issue, but the fun and the humor is a strategy, it's a tactic for people to be free and also to be truthful to themselves in a way that is not antagonist. So in other words, we are serious politicians as artists. As creators, we are politicians. We who hide behind cultural tools or creative work. But the idea that when we create something, we are imagining a world, a certain world, we are actually being political in a way. So I think in brief, that is my contribution to that, to the issue of politics and arts.
Thank you, Daniel.
Daniel, oh, go for it, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I also just wanted to just briefly respond to your initial provocation. Even art that pretends it's not political is, of course, political. You know, as soon as you put anyone in a public platform that is political and has relations of power. So, I mean, art, even when trying to be neutral, obviously isn't. You know, it's all about who is the artist, what is the framework for the viewing, and who is audiences. And all those are relations of power, as Daniel has said.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Alex. What you've just said reminds me of Linda Christensen's work, where we think of even the kind of the children's story books that we read. Those were political. They were not just children's literature. They were also inculcating a worldview or values in us. And so even something that a parent does with a child and what children...
And gender values in particular.
There we go. I just wanted, Daniel, since you're talking about it, if you could explain to us how that movement between the work that you're doing in the political theater to what you talk about when you say creating platform for dialogue. And I ask this because sometimes for the activist, one can feel like, you know what, we're just kind of putting activist paint on things. So we write an op-ed or we make a play, but nobody's listening. So how does that movement work in your work from kind of the theater that you're doing, but to what you're talking about, this space of dialogue where you're actually attempting to engage?
Yeah, basically when we are doing, I termed this political theater, but also just for the case of differentiating in terms of strategies. But what we do when we do hardcore political theater, as I said, we are advocating for something. We are very clear about what we want to achieve. We want, we are looking at it from people who already have an opinion of how things should be like. As creators ourselves, would have convinced ourselves through the creation process and through the researches that we do that the world must be like this. If we're advocating for a just world, it means political structures are hindering us from enjoying or having a just world, from having a peaceful world. So in that case, we are basically dealing with the powers that be. And then juxtapose that with the transformational theater that we use in communities. You spoke about Paulo Freire, where we believe that even the oppressor himself needs to be liberated from the oppression. So the process of transformation does not only give the voice to the communities or to the marginalized, but it also should liberate the oppressor. The first thing that they must do is that to identify that there is a problem. So sometimes having our governments thinking that they are always right, but the process of dialogue makes them see the world in a certain world view. For example, in Africa, we had colonialism and apartheid. And in my other head, I always say the fight was generally not about the people, but about occupying positions. So replacing the colonialists with the new oppressor. So in our work, we also say the oppressor is actually a victim of circumstances, a victim of the environment. And also the people must see it as such. And together we must work to make sure that that problem we can only wish it away if we work together, the citizens and those with power. Hence, the transformational theater comes about.
Thank you, Daniel. I have another question, and maybe Sarah or Ishtar, you'd like to respond. I think for Sarah, one of the first projects which I kind of got to know you through is the Colored Mentality series that was did with those film sets that were done. And something I felt about that was that it was actually able to hold together a fairly difficult and sometimes polarizing conversation around identities. Because even the term colored itself is something that some people might take offense to or reject, and others kind of hold fast onto it, and others have a completely different position altogether. But what you did with Colored Mentality was able to kind of hold or create a container for a conversation that is quite difficult to have. And this comes to the question of kind of the necessity of art within activist or political work. So for some people, it's kind of maybe seen as a tack on, like there's the political work that we're doing, and then how do we add? Where's the pamphlet that's red and yellow or black or whatever it's going to be? But how does kind of art add value? What is it that it does that it allows people to engage in a way that they wouldn't be able to engage maybe through a different medium or a different form of expression?
Okay, so I have a lot of opinions. So, firstly, I think for me the way that that notion of like the apolitical is political. I come from my I suppose foundational years was invested in like spiritual pursuits, and I think the A spiritually spiritual, and then from that I get into political and art making as part of the reason I exist. Why am I on this planet? And so the activist work and the artwork I do, I see as ways of being in which allowed me to create as an artist, but also to create a world, which is to activate, which is to art, to be an activist. And so I think that everything is art. I think that like when you slice in a tomato, you're performing art. When you are walking down the street and you're daydreaming, you're artisting. It's whether or not you can like actively consider that art. And I think that every action you take constructs the reality that we live in, because the reality we live in is co-constructed and co-maintained. It's an imagined reality that we've all bought into somehow. And I think activists rail against this imagining because we know that there's something inherently wrong with it. I think that knowledge that there's something inherently wrong with reality is across the board at the moment. And so we turn to artists to start to envision and prepare us for and predict the ways in which we can walk into the future. I think that activism requires art because it is art. I think to know that the world should be different and to work towards that is to be creating something beautiful. Maybe like very loose interpretations or conceptual interpretations, but I think it allows the work to embody joy. And I think that for too long, the work it's called the struggle, right? And with the struggle comes just absolute pain, which must be acknowledged, which must be held. But joy is required. And so I'm speaking very loosely because a lot of thoughts are in my brain. In terms of colored mentality and holding of conversation, it's really difficult for us, to be very honest. This is the first panel I've participated in like over 3 years because of how difficult colored mentality was, because we were really young and inexperienced. And it just so happened that we were in a position where we were asked to hold the space, and so we were like wanting to show up to hold that space. And I'm very proud of the way we held that space. I'm very proud of what has come out of that space and the dialogue that was that actually ceased to become something that was ours, but something that we shared. And so for me, colored mentality is art, although it's not necessarily posed in those words often. I think I'm losing point. Last thing. I think so because I started in film, the audience was always the first port of call for like who's your target audience. That's like, and that has been the approach to which I create. How do I create for an audience? It has changed. I'm very conceptually interested in resonance at the moment, and not be in the binary of like of the power binary, to almost step above it, and to resonate and to meet who is ready to meet me and to build. Thank you.
Ashley, I think you're having a chat, but you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Let's maybe engage with some of the comments or the questions that's coming through the feed. So, Alex, I think there's one from Kyla Davis that I thought you would like to respond to. Is
no,
two thoughts. Play is not always light.
No, I just placed two of them there so we remembered them. I'm not responding.
Well, I'm going to put.
I think Sarah can respond to that.
I'm going to put it up in any case. Play is not always light and not always fun. It has a real purpose and could be, for example, how children explore boundaries or learn about the world.
I mean, I think this comes off what Sarah was saying about pain and joy, you know, and I think a play space doesn't necessarily painful, but it can also be hard work, a play space and constructing a play space that might, you know, allows us to play. So I agree with that. It's the double-sidedness of it. And Sarah, you had a response about bad art.
Yeah, I think I think bad art is well, it's a bit art, but I think bad art isn't created for audiences. It can be really self-indulgent, and I think that is good art to the individual. And I think if required, then that's maybe some like form of self-therapy. But I think that if you you know, like an art that to move beyond just for yourself, to be validated in your desires to be an artist, it needs to be created for, or not be created for, but speak to more than just you. It needs to resonate. And so for me, I create sometimes with that intentionality, but my sister's an artist and she creates from a completely different space that seems completely absurd to me, and yet the end result is one that speaks to a larger experience. And I think good art, whether or not we can recognize it prior or during the process or at the end, is birthing, is bringing forth a language to which it speaks to something that we're feeling. And when we see it, we go, I feel it, you know. And I think that's across the board. It doesn't have to be like high art to do that.
Yeah, there was another comment. Yeah, go for it, please.
About the play being hard work. It is hard work. Trying to as someone, I work a lot with human rights lawyers, and currently working with kind of human rights organizations in Hungary around the closing of civil society space, as well as Venezuela, as well as Mexico, around activists who had disappeared. And the work we do is so unbelievably depressing and serious that it almost seems wrong for you to play. And so trying to, and in a lot of these spaces, the default setting is the very kind of heavy, depressing space. A lot of the time, the solutions, it's hard to get solutions from that kind of energy and that kind of space. And to try and create what Alex was talking about, trying to create a space for play and to continue that kind of work is really difficult. And it's constantly having to encourage people to kind of, just for a moment, try and let go of their current burdens, which is really difficult, especially if you are in the trenches having to deal with human rights violations every single day. But I think that kind of work is difficult. And also the second part around the question of theatre that is preachy or condescending can really work against the activist. I think one of my biggest learnings that has brought me from being a young, righteous activist on my high horse, fueled by cigarettes and bad coffee, to where I am now was a realization and an acknowledging of the fact that you are always not necessarily the right person to be doing what you're doing and saying what you're saying. So to take a step back and to be humble, to say, I'm possibly not the right person for this. I am not the right person who should be speaking. In fact, if anything, I should take a step back. And my righteousness is not enough. And that for me was a big turning point in kind of doing effective advocacy. And the second big turning point for me was around the no, if only people knew, if this idea around raising awareness as an end goal, like if only people knew, then they would behave differently. And it was like walking into a brick wall the day I realized that actually evidence isn't enough. You can provide evidence until you're blue in the face that, for example, decriminalization of sex work is the right way to go, but that's not enough. You need more to convince people, and that needing more to convince people, and the way to convince people is often through moving them through a story, through a narrative, through cultivating empathy, by trying to engage with them in different ways. That isn't a kind of, no, but you should really read this fact sheet. If you read this fact sheet, you would really understand that human rights are important. So those are kind of the two big shifts in my practice that I think there will be many, many more.
I'm going to jump in before we get the next comment there, Ashley, because I think you've raised a very useful point about collaboration and recognizing one's own strengths or pitfalls potentially, and going, well, that person could much more easily organize a flash mob than me, or this person has got amazing choreography skills. Why would I try and do this by myself? And I think it speaks also to that propensity for burnout that you were talking about earlier, Ishtar, with activists feeling very over stretched with their righteous indignation, and a lot of the finger wagging as well. But I wondered also if there's something that's coming out in this conversation that's about the value of demystifying the process of making the arts, and so, the final thing doesn't just happen by some genius or imagination that turns up and it's fully formed and perfect. And if that was the case, I would be very happy, because it would take a lot less effort. But it is itself work, and it does require, a whole range of skills. And sometimes you don't have them. Sometimes it is about collaborating with others to get them. But all of those things are in order to create those containers that can make the change, which is the thing that I see as common across our speakers here. And we have a puppy that wants to join the panel as well. That's very cool. Ashley, go ahead.
There was a question or comment. It was directed at Daniel, but I think anyone can answer this or engage with this. And when I read this, as someone who works in a non-profit space, unfortunately, I think this question to me reads of kind of political economy as well. And this language of monitoring and evaluation is something that scares but also frustrates. But I mean, what I've learned, our students are currently engaged in a project where they are learning to make films. And what I've realized is it takes time and it takes effort to produce or to do work. And so this question here again is one which kind of alludes to those kind of issues that sit in the background of the work that we do. When we're producing a film or a play, it takes people, it takes resources to do that also. So what does your monitoring and evaluation look like, given that theatre is...
Yeah, that is a very serious and critical question, and always confusing when we work with monitoring and evaluation, because rightly so, I think the mainstream monitoring and evaluation tools sometimes do not work when we are evaluating or monitoring theatre practices. For example, when you are dealing with communities and when you are dealing with creativity, it has to do more with changing behaviors and attitudes. And those behaviors, attitudes, and practices cannot be seen as outputs, as mainstream development agencies would want us to believe. They are not outputs. Probably they are outcomes, but more long term. So in years of trying to implement the monitoring and evaluation process, we always find ourselves conflicting with, for example, if it is a funder who demand certain outputs and, for example, something that is quantitative. We want 200 people at a performance, so we reach 200 people. For us, we can tick boxes, but for us, what is more important is, has there been movement in the behavior and beliefs and values of the people more than the numbers that we have reached? So if we reach 10 people, if we manage to impact 10 people at a time, and those 10 people go and spread the word around, then for us, it would have been successful. Whilst others look at success being how many people have you reached. So yeah, it depends. Financially, when we are doing professional theater, then we can say how many people did we reach. But for us, it is what is the outcome at the end of the day. Did we manage to create conversations? Were the conversations robust enough such that people went home with something new, with new knowledge, with new ways of thinking? So I attended a certain conference in Joburg where we said, I think we need to develop our own monitoring and evaluation methodologies and tools that really speak to what we do, not to what mainstream development is. Yeah, so when we do work like mainstream activists, they will say, we marched, we petitioned, and for them that's enough. But I think creativity goes beyond petitions, goes beyond just the performance at that particular time. Sometimes the results, you see them later, cascading. So it is that conundrum that as Savannah Trust we find ourselves in, particularly for funded projects where there is a certain demand from partners, yet you really know that our work is not out-based, it is behavior change-based. Yeah.
And also when you're doing political work, is it that, I mean, artists find themselves in the same space as the researcher who's looking for research funds, or the person trying to do community work who now has to look for funds in order to do this? There's some bread and butter issues to attend to, and then there's also the issue of funding the work that needs to be done. But then the issue of, if one is always beholden to a funder, then how do you actually begin to engage in the political work that you want to? And I see this as kind of Bottom Up is an NGO. So we've had experience, for example, where we've lost funders because we don't like you talking about race or gender or class issues. So how do you begin to do that work then when, I mean, as an art, maybe as an institution or social institution, is also nested kind of within this bigger neoliberal frame or issue?
For us, it's always a negotiated space with the funders. Just like what you said, we lost one of our big funders, I think 5 years ago. They asked us, do you think art is effective? For them, they were used to seeing people marching in the streets of Harare. So even today, when they put up a call, I don't respond, because we are at different levels. I would rather work with small partners that understand what theater can and what it cannot do. So this has been the approach. Maybe it's because also our departure point is that we love what we do. and we cannot be railroaded into doing something that we don't believe in. So even ourselves, when we are training the artists, first of all, we make sure that they have a commitment to that which they do. So if we are dealing with human rights, they understand the human rights and they are committed to the human rights. So similarly, we must also be having freedom to say and to negotiate with the funder to say, I don't think this works. You might want us to bring 1,000 people by the end of the project, and we are unable to do that. So either we agree or we don't. We won't lie to the funder and lie to ourselves that we have the capacity to fill stadiums as if we were a political party. Our medium is interpersonal, and our funders must understand that our medium is interpersonal. And our argument is we have been focusing on numbers. That is why there is no change in the world. But we must focus on the soul, the inner of the human being. We must focus on the human being, not on the groups of people. And that is only when change comes if we focus on the inner being of a person. That is the human being, the spirit and the soul. So for us, it is always a negotiation with our funders to say, listen, this is what we can do and what we cannot do.
Thank you for that, Daniel.
Can I just add?
I see we... Oh, please go for it. Yeah.
Sorry, I'll be quick. And my experience with funders is limited, but it's incredible. And I think often, like this idea of dependency from artists or NGOs or community workers on funders, like how are you going to find sustainability? Not for us. It's like this big question that funders almost impose on people doing really important work. The dependency isn't the fault of the people, the activist or the community worker or the artist. It's because of the inequality that exists within our system. Funders have money based on the fact, okay, I'm not going to go into that. But I just think that question also needs to be flipped, you know, like I think in this moment, there are ways in which one needs to survive. So you have to play that game, but that game in itself is problematic.
Ishtar wants to make a further statement there.
Also, Shoran, because I also make a habit of pushing back on funders and telling them how their monitoring and evaluation frameworks are stupid. So, as someone who has experience in railing against these M&E frameworks. I mean, one of the things that I found really useful in advocacy, because it is kind of Kyla's question and Juliet's question in the comments, was around like, how do you push back and how do you measure hearts and minds? How do you measure empathy? And what we found was really helpful, both in pushing back as well as measuring what is useful for us, is coming up with our own ways of measuring what we want to monitor and evaluate. So for example, often with lobbying or advocacy, they'll want to know how many meetings did you have? And so I can say, me and the Deputy Minister of Justice, we've had many meetings. Does he like me? Not at all. Does he loathe me? Yes. Does that prove anything that I've met with him a lot? No, it doesn't. But what we came up with is indicators that do prove whether we've moved people to care about our cause. And those indicators are different. They are, do we have their personal cell phone number? Do they engage with us on WhatsApp? Do they let us know when a meeting is happening before they publicize it? What is the depth of the relationship that we have? And we've created our own indicators to measure the depth of the relationship, because we know the amount of times we meet with them doesn't mean anything really. It's how we have changed their minds. And one of the very interesting examples that we have was about 2 years ago, where we were in Parliament for the gender roundtable, which Parliament loves to have every Women's Month. Very little comes of it. But one of the MPs was speaking, and they said the word prostitute, and another MP nudged them and was like, no, we don't use sex work. We don't use that word. And for me, that might not seem like a big shift if we had to like write it down in a report. But for us, that was huge. It was huge to say, okay, there's been a language shift in Parliament. There's been a language shift where you cannot use the word prostitute anymore. And we didn't have to intervene. It was someone else who intervened before us. And for us, that was a huge win for us. But that's because we created our own monitoring and evaluation kind of frameworks. And I think there's a lot of funders who are actually quite open to the conversation to say, what you're measuring is not really that effective, but here, this is how we measure and we track and we find it effective. And I find a lot of people are open to having this conversation, but because of the kind of power inequity that comes with kind of the donor grantee relationship, we're very scared to push back. And I think we shouldn't be, because as Sarah was saying, we're doing really important work. And so I think if we're saying we're doing important work, we acknowledge we're doing important, this is how we're tracking it and see it as useful, I think a lot of people are open to having that conversation.
Yeah,
I think I'm gonna quickly jump there, because it looks like we've done this amazing journey from speaking about specific examples from our own areas of practice and experience to this kind of meta level of discussing how we might come up with a monitoring and evaluation framework that is actually meaningful for the work that we do. But it seems to me also that although that is obviously very specific to our own projects and our own kind of areas, that this kind of conversation is one way that we might go back to our organizations and go, you know what, other people are also making up their own monitoring and evaluation frameworks. We could do it too. And, you know, they said it was meaningful and it's working for them. So it's a useful thing to just reflect and recognize, you know, the power of that multiplicity that we can see here this evening. I'll be quiet now, Ashley.
I think I'll just read a little quote from Henry Giroux. His work must be done to cultivate an alternative imagination, that such work is pedagogical and that it takes place on several fronts. When students learn to tell their own stories, they're able to reject framings that come from the disimagination machine and which position them as marginals, disposable, and as problems to be managed. And I mean, the series of Imagining Otherwise, these live streams, we've kind of engaged with a range of issues over the course of the series. But this issue of monitoring and evaluation, for me, just to kind of recognize it as something which is also sitting squarely within a neoliberal discourse and as part of that disimagination machine. And to find ways of rejecting this and to imagine a different possibility even in that regard. But I want to kind of bring us to a close for this evening. So I want to ask each of our guests if you could have some last remarks to leave us with, or food for thought to leave us with. You've left us with so much already. Maybe Ishtar, you can start.
Why did you pick on me? It's always kind of the pressure of closing remarks are always something like that. It's terrifying because there's some expectation that I need to like drop some knowledge bombs on everyone right now and kind of like leave everyone with a drop of genius, which I do not have. But I do find this conversation incredibly invigorating and enlightening, and as you were saying, like to know that there's other people out there really experimenting with different ways of doing this. I mean the only shout out I can do is like just shout out all the people on this panel and the awesome work that they're doing. I'm wanting to follow all the things, and it's really, especially given kind of the nature of the world we're in currently, we need this. And I think everyone on this panel is doing just incredibly kind of life-giving, amazing work. And I am looking forward to following everything and all of you. And that is all that I have for now.
Daniel.
Yes. Yeah, I think for me, this is really mind-opening. And I'm very happy to know that there are people out there who are doing the same work that we are doing and who are working very hard to have a peaceful and just society, and who are slowly questioning the status quo everywhere. I'm happy to be part of this discussion, and I hope I'll continue to follow these discussions. And for me, this was mind-blowing just to learn what others are doing, and I wish I would follow all of you from now going forward. And I wish we can continue to share ideas, to share skills, and to share knowledge, and have these Pan-African think tanks towards arts activism. You know, one of the challenges that we have in this world of ours is the notion that arts cannot change anything. And the notion that we are not effective. So by continuously reminding people of what we do and how we do it and the impact that we are making, we are actually writing our narrative as this generation of activists. We have new forms and new issues to fight for. Thank you very much for inviting me to this platform.
Thank you. Alex.
Yeah, just to say I'm thrilled to be on this platform, and that I'm thrilled I suggested all these people. I'm just claiming my greatness to get Ishtar and Daniel and everyone here, because I think it's been really wonderful. And because what I found so rich is all of us are coming from a different perspective towards understanding the political possibilities of art and creating a way for people to step into care, as Ishtar said, about caring an issue and understanding an issue that people might see as radically outside themselves. And I think we have all demonstrated through very, very diverse ways that how art can do that. So thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Sarah.
Yes, I actually have loads of thoughts that I could drop, loads of bombs. But I think that the call for imagination work is everywhere right now, and I think that's because of the current moment. You know, this conversation doesn't sit within a vacuum. The way in which despair and despondency and fear have really shown themselves to exist within everyone, and it has been made visible for everyone. It's so tangible that the act of hope, the act of art, the act of seeing beyond it's not a luxury. It's not something that we do because we just that way inclined. It's an imperative of the moment, because without it we will be lost in this moment. And we are alive, and we deserve wonderful, beautiful lives beyond the fact that, you know, we deserve beautiful, expansive beings, and we should be those beings. And we can only be those beings if we claim that we are them and we act towards them. And that can only come from art, and that can only come from activism. And love and healing.
Thanks, Sarah. I like that. Ali.
Well, how can I add something to this amazing call that Sarah's just ended on? All I would say is that I would want such passion and engaged conversation and dialogue and enthusiasm to be possible for all the young people that we're working with, and for all those people that you've reflected are right now experiencing pain and hopelessness and despair, because we know that the imagination and that these kinds of conversations can push us towards something amazing and incredible. So I'm very excited, and I can't imagine what the rest of my night's going to be like, but I'm just super happy to have been joined by you all tonight. Thank you so much. And thank you, Ashley.
Yeah, thank you all to all our panelists, I guess, for joining us tonight and sharing your stories with us. I know I've learned a lot about art and activism tonight, more than I have in any other engagements. So I also want to thank those who have joined us as viewers, who've commented and who shared your post. We are still going to be doing one more Imagining Otherwise, but we'd love to hear your further feedback. So the videos will be up online after this. If you want to share them, you can share them. But thank you for joining us, and keep watching our page to see our next episode of Imagining Otherwise. Cheers. We're still live.
Hi, Alex.